How many of you are ready for exam analysis this semester? All right, so hopefully I'm seeing a few hands. If you're not raising your hand right now, this is what we want you to do, okay? We want you to go ahead and print out that study worksheet. And before we give you any other instructions, we want you to write down, what is it that you're unsure about related to exam analysis? We started the Snapshot series about 2 weeks ago, so this is our third snapshot for this series, and it'll be our last one for a while because we're always coming back to exam analysis. More than 70% of nurse educators report to us that they struggle with exam analysis when they're preparing for the exam. So write down what it is that you're still unclear about as it relates to exam analysis. That's first and foremost. And then the second step we want you to take is to pull out your resources, okay? The first resource we're going to be talking from is our study workbook, okay? So this is what it looks like. It's also right here in the description. What we like about this workbook, and first I should start by saying this is based on our early adopters' feedback. They felt like something was missing. We used the recommended resources from NLN and they were successful on the exam, but they said, you know what, if I would have had a study workbook to kind of guide me along the way, then I think that my study time would have been expedited and more meaningful. So we did develop this workbook, and we've had several different versions, but once you purchase the workbook, you always have access to the content in a digital form. And then if you want us to mail you the paper form, we're happy to do that. You have that option as well. All right, so first we're going to just take a look at one of the elements that's included in the study workbook. So on page 41, it lists factors that it can impact reliability. Okay, so go ahead and write that down on your study worksheet. I want you to write down 3 factors that can affect reliability when we talk about exam analysis. And if you have no idea what even one of those are, then that's okay. We want you to go ahead and write that down as a muddy point. That would be a great objective that you want to accomplish during this snapshot. All right, so welcome back, everybody. If this is the first time you're tuning in, welcome. We're happy that you're here. Go ahead and subscribe and click the bell so every single time there's a new episode, you'll be notified right away. That usually happens every week. And then if you're returning, we're happy that you're back as well. And we want you to pull out the resources, okay? So Billings and Halstead, that's going to be chapter 25. Now, there's a lot of content in Billings and Halstead to help you close your knowledge gaps. But with our snapshots, we like to align it with the evidence, okay? So chapter 25 is going to be your primary source to help you close your knowledge gaps. And then if you have Dr. Caputi CNA review book, it's going to be chapter 3. All right, and then I would say if you're not sure about these resources, you can head to the description, and that's where you're going to see a full citation for both of these resources as well. And then our final resource we want you to pull out is going to be the candidate handbook. That is located on the nln.org website. You want to print out whichever handbook you are on the journey for that respective exam to take. Okay, so if you're on the journey to CNE, that's the handbook you want to print out. And then you want to look at that detailed test blueprint. This is your guide. This is your map to success to ensure that you're closing your knowledge gaps as you're moving forward on your journey. In this snapshot, we're going to be using a couple of different resources. First, we're going to use the whiteboard feature, and I'm just choosing to use my tablet, but you can use whatever whiteboard is available to you for a virtual session. Obviously, if you're in person, whiteboards are usually available in the room. Now, the reason why we're going to use a variety of modalities is to better engage our students. We know with our adult learners, the attention span is very short. So we want to keep them engaged in a way that they're able to walk away learning the material, or perhaps they just identify what gaps they have, right? But it's all about us bringing new information or validating content into the classroom that allows transference of knowledge. So we're teaching in a way, we're using those evidence-based teaching strategies that allows our students to learn. We want to engage in the simultaneous teaching and learning process. We want to avoid being the sage on the stage. We want to be a guide on the side that facilitates learning, facilitates that transference of knowledge, and even coaches students about their performance, either in the classroom, in the STEM skills lab, or in the clinical setting. Okay, that's known as formative evaluation when we're giving continuous feedback. And then summative evaluation, which if you take a look in your study workbook, if you have that in front of you, that's going to be on page 38. You're going to see several examples of both formative and summative evaluation as we think about where the content for this snapshot aligns within our detailed test blueprint. It is going to be under competency 3. All right, so let's go ahead and flip over to our different technology that we have not used before in a snapshot, and that is going to be our iPad. Okay, like I said, you can use a different modality. If you are teaching online, you have the option to just use, you can pull up, once you do a screen share, you can easily just pull up the option for a Word document. That works as well. But I just wanted to use something different. So we're actually using our iPad. And then what you will see, if you choose to use your iPad, you'll see an option to click on screen sharing from your iPad, or it's called screen mirroring by Apple. So you can see here on my whiteboard is exam analysis. That's the document that I have opened. This is what I want you to do. Okay, so you've already printed out your study worksheet. I want you to write down 2 facts, okay, just 2 facts that you already know about exam analysis. And I'll tell you why in a second. So go ahead and write down 2 facts that you know. I'm going to also do the same as we're participating in this activity together. All right, so I'm going to write down for me, I'm going to choose KR20. And let's see, what else do I want to choose? I'm going to choose p-value. Okay, you can choose any 2 that you are knowledgeable about. Okay, if I can spell, that would be helpful. Okay, there we go. So KR20 and p-value are the 2 that I chose. This is what I want you to do next. I want you to write down in the next, let's just take 10, 15 seconds or so. I want you to write down everything it is that you know about those 2 concepts, those 2 variables. And if there are really not 2 concepts that come to mind that you know a lot about, that's okay. What you want to do is think about what resources you're going to use to close your knowledge gaps. Okay, so step 1 is doing that assessment, which we're going to talk about shortly. If you haven't had a chance to do yet, that's okay. But we want to make sure you do the assessment to evaluate where you are today. Just like with our students, just like when we take care of patients, the first step is assessment. So figuring out where you are, a tool that is available to you is that exam analysis assessment. Basic is the first version we highly recommend that you take, but then we also have an advanced version that's free and available to you. You can take it as many times as you need to. Once you complete the analysis, you see your answers. Once you complete the questions on the full analysis, you'll see your answers. And then you're able to go back and retake it over and over again. Okay, so we hope that's a tool that's helpful. Again, number 1 is assessment, making sure you do a thorough assessment of where your knowledge gaps are. All right, so I was talking to allow you time to write down everything you know about the 2 concepts you've chosen. So for KR20, what I know is that it measures reliability. Okay, so that's what I would write down first is reliability. And then I would also write down the range. So I know that that sweet spot's going to be 0.7 to 0.80. Okay, that's what I know. And then next is looking at p-value. Well, I know p-value tells me the difficulty of that specific exam question. And I know, for example, if it's 0.30, then only 30% of the students chose the correct answer. And I know that's a high level of difficulty. Okay, so that's what I know. This exercise is going to allow you, first of all, remember I said when we got started, I was going to share the rationale for why I use this approach. Well, mentally, when we go into a discussion, a conversation where we are anxious about the content that may be reviewed or that we may be discussing in a meeting, the first step that we want to take is to think about what is it that we already know that allows us to come from a strong point of knowledge that we kind of establish a foundation, just like Bloom's taxonomy, that lower level of learning. Well, once we establish that foundation, we're able to build on it. So that's automatically going to give us confidence coming into the conversation, coming into the classroom. We want to leverage the knowledge that our students already have in an effort to build from that. Okay, so that's why I intentionally asked you all first and foremost, what is it that you know? Just write down 2 concepts. And then you all saw me kind of demonstrate in this exercise exactly what the steps are that I was taking to share with you all what my knowledge was and the specific concepts I chose to share as part of this content review. This is a great reflection to also do. I love doing reflective practice at the beginning of my classes, especially when I was teaching synchronous or even when I teach synchronous now. I like to find out what your muddy points are. A 1-minute reflection paper is a great activity to engage in with our students. And then one of the colleagues shared with me that she actually does an exit reflection. I think that's great too, because that gives us a sense of maybe topics that we want to better clarify with our students, or even perhaps additional content that we want to provide to our students in the next class, or maybe there's an independent assignment. So there are so many ways that we can engage in the learning process with our students beyond just the traditional ways. We know that's how our students learn best, when they are actively engaging in the learning process. Okay, so now we're going to use Prezi, which you all know that's a technology that we enjoy using. And I'll tell you why I really like to use Prezi is because it increases engagement. We know with our students that there's so much content that they are learning, and we want our students to stay engaged. We want them to stay connected with what we're talking about, so that we're not being that sage on the stage, we're being that guide on the side to facilitate the learning process. So where are you on the map? Okay, when you think about the content of exam analysis, we know it can be complex. So where are you on the map right now? Do you have a lot of muddy points, or do you feel like you have just a few muddy points? Okay, so I want you to think about where you are on the map and then mark the spot. That's what the first exercise was about, you marking exactly where you are today, so you know what your next steps are going to be. And this is what the exam analysis assessment will allow you to do. So I'm going to go ahead and share that now. This exam analysis is our basic version. With the basic version, you're able to scan the QR code, or you can find it right here in the description. Okay, if you don't have more than one device, that's okay. You're going to be able to scan this QR code, and it will open up to the exam analysis. The great thing about this tool, first of all, it's free. Again, this is the basic version, but we also have an advanced version. It allows you to do a self-assessment of where you are today related to these concepts. And then at the end, you'll see how you scored as it relates to the incorrect or correct answer that you chose. And you can go back and take it again, okay? And then we also have the advanced version. The advanced version is going to allow you to go a little bit deeper into some of these concepts to make sure that you have a full comprehension of knowledge and are able to choose the best choice once you get to the actual CNE exam. Okay, so what is it that you know? Well, if you joined us for the first snapshot, we talked about distractor evaluation. We want to determine whether or not learning has happened. That is the ultimate goal of an exam, to validate that learning has happened. Our distractors are also known as, fill in the blank. Go ahead and put that in the chat if you are watching this episode or this snapshot live with us. And if you're not, that's okay. Just write it on your paper. If you actually wrote down incorrect answer, you are correct. The distractors are really those answers that are going to attract the learner that is not knowledgeable about the content. Okay, so that is the purpose of the distractor. And then the second element or concept that we looked at in our previous snapshot was item discrimination. We want to be able to discriminate between our high scoring students and our low scoring students, between the correct answer and the incorrect answer. Okay, and in this snapshot, we're going to close out our series looking at item difficulty. What story does item difficulty tell us? Well, it tells us the percentage of students who chose the correct answer, and it is on a scale of 0 all the way up to 1.0. If we have item difficulty of less than 0.30, then that means that it was a really hard question, because only 30% of the students chose the correct answer. And then as opposed to 0.7 to 0.8, then that's seen as average because that means 70 to 80% of the students chose the correct answer. Now I want you to think about, why is difficulty important? What story does difficulty tell us? And what are the other factors we want to consider when we look at item difficulty? Okay, so go ahead and write that down. See what you think about some of those elements, and then I want to kind of talk through them with you. So if you thought about this and you've written down a couple of topics, that's great. If you haven't had a chance to, that's okay too. When we think about item difficulty, the first thing we want to look at is going to be our Bloom's level. Okay, so for each question, because our first step in developing a valid and reliable exam, we already know, right? I can hear you all saying, that's right, detailed exam blueprint. That is going to give us the map to ensure we are aligning the objectives, the learning objectives we have in our course with the actual learning that we expect to happen. So for every exam question, we map it or we align it back to the content that we've covered in the class and the supporting resources that have provided that context for our student, okay, or that content. And then the third element is objective. So which objective was that specific question mapped back to? So that's the first component, is let's look and see what level on Bloom's taxonomy was that specific question. And then second of all, we want to gather that qualitative data from our students. And how do we do that? Well, if you guessed during the exam review, you are correct. Okay, so doing that exam review to gather feedback from our students about content related to that question. What's still not clear? What do I further need to clarify as the teacher of the content? Okay, I'm validating that learning did not happen if I have a p-value that's less than 0.30. Or could it be that the question wasn't written correctly, right? We know that writing exam questions is an art and a science, and many of our colleagues do it better than others. So let's just make sure when we're writing exam questions that we are factoring in the science of it, so making sure that we are completing the appropriate training, as well as the art of it, making sure that we're collaborative and we're thinking about the grammar that's used in our questions, and making sure that there are no spelling errors, making sure that we're collaborating with our peers for our colleague to review that question and make sure it reads in the way we intend for it to read, okay? And we can't leave out our correct option and our distractors as well. We want to do a full evaluations of those as well, okay? So what is it that we want to consider when we get data about item difficulty? Number one is, what story is it telling us, right? The quantitative story based on Bloom's taxonomy, and then that qualitative story based on the feedback that we get from our students during that exam review. All right, so those are some key elements. If you didn't choose any of those, that's okay. All right, so we want you to write it down as a muddy point for you. Now let's take a look at the thought-provoking question and see if you chose the correct options for this one. What you're going to see right here in the description is the synopsis of what you see on your screen. When you get to the CNE exam, depending on the version that you receive, the format may be similar to this, it may not. But what you want to think about are two things. First and foremost, what is it that I know for sure about content in this question? Okay, so you want to write down, you should have a scratch sheet of paper or a dry erase board. What is it that I know about p-value, about difficulty, about mean score? Okay, and then the second consideration you want to think about is, what is the question asking me? Okay, so you can see that this is all about interpretation. What you see on your screen is, we're just going to walk through what this snapshot tells you. This is a summary of the item difficulty and the mean. So you have 8 test takers, total points is 100, p-value 0.29, and the mean score is 72. And then you are going to go ahead and write down, what is your interpretation? So what does 8 exam test takers tell us? Okay, is that a good number? Am I going to be able to see discrimination, a strong discrimination with 8 test takers? Okay, and then 100 points. What is the interpretation? Is that an acceptable number of points or not? P-value of 0.29, what story does that tell me? And then 72 mean score, what does that tell me? All right, so you just want to go through each one of these and think about what is it that that specific number is telling you about that data point. So with 8 test takers, if you wrote down on your paper that that's an insufficient number of test takers to establish reliability, you are correct. Depending on the data source, you're going to see around 30 or so test takers is usually a sufficient number to determine reliability, okay? But certainly if you have a higher number, that's great too. What you can also consider is if there are multiple sections or even semester over semester, pulling that data together to determine what story does that exam analysis tell you related to reliability. Total points, 100. What do you all think about that? That's correct. If you chose a sufficient number of test items to establish reliability, you are correct. So 100 test items, you know, that is a lot of test items. However, anywhere the range that the data tells us is, you know, 60 or so up to 100, we usually can see a relationship of reliability once we get to that 60 or so test items. Some sources are going to say 50, but just know NLN's not going to try to trick you. That sweet spot of, you know, 60 or so and above is going to be ideal. And then the p-value of 0.29, what does that tell you? If you wrote down high difficulty, you are correct. Remember when we looked at the example of item difficulty, which is the purpose of this snapshot, it is looking at that range of 0.30 tells us, or less than 0.30 tells us that there's a high difficulty level because only 30% of students chose the correct answer. So the p-value of 0.29 tells us that 29% of the students chose the correct answer. So what is it that we would do as our next step? If you chose the qualitative analysis where we have an exam review, we talk to students about the concepts and the content related to that question to really validate if they understood the content or not. And then second of all is looking at that blueprint. How well did we align the content? How well did we write the question? That's that qualitative piece that we also want to do somewhat of a self-evaluation of. And then mean score of 72. Well, we know one, and I didn't make this point, but you probably saw it. Passing score is 78. The average score on the test is 72. That's below the identified passing score. So we want to do a further analysis to determine whether or not there is some opportunity for us to improve the questions or to improve the content. Okay, so those are the two considerations that we want to explore. Well, this is going to complete our snapshot series looking at item analysis. We hope this content has been helpful, and we look forward to seeing you in the next snapshot. Until then, reach out if you have questions, info@drsellarseducate.com. Have a great one, everybody.